All right, welcome back, everybody, to the live portion of Advance, the first live portion. We are shaking things up a bit for those of you who are veterans of our Advance program. For the live GR update, we are really, really pleased to welcome one of your own, the only CPA in the state legislature, Bill Roemer. State Representative Bill Roemer is also chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. So he is your guy with all the insights on what's hot in Ohio right now in terms of tax. So one of the things, we only have a few minutes together. Feel free to our audience to add your questions to the Q&A box. And we hopefully will have an opportunity to get to those. If we don't, we will cover them at the end in the last live portion with verbal answers. You don't have to stay on, although you're welcome. In any event, so one of the things, let's dive right in. I know that you are co-chairing a really important study committee right now on property tax in Ohio. That is a hot issue. Can you talk about why the committee was formed, what you're learning, and what you think might happen?
Sure, Barb, and again, it's great to be here. I always appreciate doing this with the Ohio Society of CPAs and my fellow members. The Property Tax Study Commission is something that I, as Ways and Means Chair in Ohio for the Ohio House. And by the way, for this organization, I don't have to explain what Ways and Means means, as I do when I talk other places. What we did is in the last operating budget, one of the things we established there was this committee, because at that time, over a year ago, there was a lot of concern that property taxes are the number one item that we as members have contacts relative to. And obviously we were very prescient because that is true. A number of counties have gone through either the triennial or the sexennial reassessment. Every 3 years, there's, I'll say, a computer-based update of valuations. And then on a 6-year basis, every property is examined. And what we saw where I am in Summit County, I think that was an average increase in valuation. I think in the end, it ended up at around 31%. For those folks that are in Southwest Ohio, there were some counties where it was 34, 38, almost 40%. And in counties, you saw increases in southern Summit County, if anyone knows where the Portage Lakes are, over 40% increases in average valuations. And because of something called inside millage and the 20 mil floor for schools, in parts of the bill, that translates to a 4% increase in property taxes. That's why the committee was formed. We've had, I believe, 7 meetings now, and it's been very expansive. Everything from the Ohio auditors, school districts were in just last week, and treasurers talking. We're taking in a lot of the information, and what we're going to do is we're going to issue 1 and maybe even 2 reports coming out of this of things that we can do from a property tax perspective. I met with the speaker last week, and what we'd like to do is develop a series of bills that potentially could be enacted this General Assembly. Everything has to be done by December 31st, because then we start everything over. That would mitigate some of these property tax increases and make the process better.
Thank you so much. We had one question in the chat. Do you think property taxes will ever go away?
I can unequivocally say no. Property taxes raise a huge amount of money for schools, but it's not just schools, it's townships, it's the ADM board, it's the Children's Services Board, it's health districts. So property taxes are a method of funding all of those. The money has to come from somewhere. We've made significant cuts in the personal income taxes. Anybody on here probably knows we cut $3.1 billion from everyone's personal income taxes in the last budget also. So, and I will give the Ohio Society of CPAs a lot of credit. Relative to the CAT. We reduced the CAT by 25%. However, 90% of small businesses will not be paying the CAT in Ohio. And I can say, again, unequivocally, that is the result of input from Greg Saul, Barb Benton, Scott Wiley, the Ohio Society of CPAs, and others that was given to me to work with our friends in the Senate and come to consensus on that. So what we've tried to do is cut taxes for small business, cut taxes on the personal income tax side, and we're looking at mitigating property taxes.
Great, thank you. So you've kind of touched on it already, but a little more elaboration. What do you think are the biggest changes the legislature has enacted so far this session? You've mentioned a couple already. Any others you
Sure.
can bring to mind?
Sure. Well, let me go back to one that I mentioned. What we do every year, we do a budget. Actually, in some cases, we do multiple budgets for Bureau of Workers' Compensation and others. But last year, we did the operating budget that contained the cuts in personal income tax and CAT. But that's what really funds the general fund for Ohio. A huge amount of things. I think it was a 7,000-page bill. So that happened last year. This year, and we're currently working on it, we're working on the capital budget. And what the capital budget does is it funds capital projects in each of our communities. And I'll use Summit County as an example. In Summit County, the Akron-Canton Airport needed new tarmac space. And we were able to fund that for $2.5 million. That's going to lead to 2 additional hangars. I actually met with the Deputy Transportation Secretary earlier this week, US, and they're going to look at some federal funding. So we were able to leverage that $2.5 million into a huge expansion at the Akron-Canton Airport that's going to lead to significant economic development. We've had some other things, but I will be quite frank also. This has been the least productive General Assembly since the 1950s. So we haven't had a lot of the normal bills that we normally would have, but we have done those things that really are impactful from a financial perspective.
Great, great. So looking back to your role as chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, what do you think are the priorities for the remainder of this session, which will, of course, end December 31st?
Sure. Thanks, Barb. And I always appreciate the fact that the OSCPA shows up at my committees every week. We have met, I believe, 35 times, which we are the most active committee with the most amount of testimony, with the most number of bills passed. We've done a really, really good job on a lot of things. One of the things, I think we have somewhere around 10 homestead exemption bills, whether to mitigate or eliminate property taxes for classes of individuals, whether it's veterans or disabled veterans or those over 70. We have to look at all of those things because the problem is those are very, very expensive. So we're going to be looking at that. We just voted out 2 bills earlier this week. One of them was the elimination of replacement levies. I won't get too wonky on that one, and fixes the House Bill 126 from last General Assembly. And one had to do with sales tax on ATVs used for farm operations. So we do some very big bills. We do some smaller bills. This coming week, we're going to hear testimony on, I think we have 5 bills we're hearing testimony on next Tuesday at 3 p.m. if anyone's interested in tuning in on the Ohio channel.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And what he's talking about, the Ohio channel is run by the state. It live streams every committee hearing for the House and the Senate, and they also archive them. So you can go back and watch all of those 35 committee hearings that you have had so far, right? We had a couple of questions here. The attendance check is up, so all you need to do is minimize that. Don't actually answer it, Representative. The rest of you need to answer it.
Okay, well, I think I'm getting CPE for this, am I not?
Yes, indeed you are. Yeah. So a couple of questions related to Ways and Means. Is there any, you mentioned the ATVs for farming. Is there any other assistance being discussed for farmers? We had a question from the audience on that one.
I will say indirectly. One of the things that we're very concerned about is something called current agricultural use valuation. It's a very complicated process for valuing farms for property tax purposes. And there's been impacts on that in Ohio, across Ohio, but again, particularly in Southwest Ohio, where I have heard instances of some farm valuations increasing by over 100% for property tax purposes. So the Ohio Farm Bureau, which is very influential, has come in and we talk to regularly. That's something that we're examining in context of a total redo of the property tax valuation methodology.
Awesome. You've touched on a little bit, but could you talk a little bit about the interaction you have with OSCPA regarding tax policy and how CPAs around the state can help engage to help shape laws and regulations that are being discussed?
Sure, I'll do that in two ways, Barb. Um, I will say that of all of the, and I'll call you guys lobbyists because technically you are, but I receive vast amount of information from Barb and Scott and Greg Saul. Greg and I talk multiple times a week um, relative to issues. And just to give you an example, there was a fellow CPA in Copley who reached out to me. He works for Schulte Companies, Jim Schulte. And he had a question about the annualization of municipal income tax withholding. And I'm pretty good, but Greg is really good. So Greg Saul did a lot of that research. And if that gentleman is on, he's going to be getting an answer on that question later today. Because either I have questions from members relative to specific tax policies, or Greg gets questions from members and asks me where we're going. So we have this huge interaction on I'll say almost daily basis of issues. And we very much value the information that comes from our members also, because our members are in the community with clients on a daily basis. And that's really, really important. As an example, one of the things that we've seen is that we've been getting a lot of letters, I'll say tax collection letters, where people's withholdings and their refunds were held. We're working on that issue also. My office gets those and we redirect those either to tax or to Bureau of Workers' Compensation or others. But that's something that Greg has identified as an issue statewide also.
Great. And I would encourage all of our members who are listening, if you identify issues, please raise them with Greg or I, and we can dig in from there. One other thing, if you don't mind, that I'd like you to touch on. I know you have been really engaged in a huge problem for our state in terms of workforce issues, and that's childcare.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the bill you recently introduced?
Yes. Representative Andrea White, again from Southwest Ohio, and I introduced a bill, and I will give her full credit because she's very, very, very passionate and knowledgeable about this, relative to credits for businesses that establish childcare at their business. And it's House Bill 424. In fact, breaking news, we're going to have hearings. I think it's going to be next Tuesday or Wednesday at 9 a.m. where she and I will present. We'll present what's called sponsor testimony. And what it'll do is if a business establishes childcare, there will be a tax credit associated with that for the costs associated with it. I think we max the credit out at $10 million. But there's a couple states that are doing this, and it's very successful because one of the things we hear is that people are not able to get back into the workforce because childcare is the #1 issue they face. And if you can bring, if the Ohio Society of CPAs in your facilities, would establish some sort of childcare facility, there would be a tax credit associated with that. And at the same time, you'd have a lot of happy employees that, their children would be, well cared for in a safe environment, just close to mom or dad.
Well, best of luck with that.
Thank you.
So I'm done with the prepared questions that I had for you, but we had a number of them come through in our Q&A box. If you can see that yourself.
I will. I see there's like 31 here. And
But while you're digging, one of the ones was, how can we get more CPAs to run for office?
You kind of do what I did. I was happily retired, still active, and somebody gave me a call, and I've worked my way up from there. It's important. I can tell you, I know of 2 local CPAs, Jim Schulte, who I coincidentally mentioned is a township trustee. I think he's chair of the Copley Township, and Ron Antol, who is a fellow CPA in Boston Heights, is now the mayor of Boston Heights. So,
Awesome.
Based on that, you start small. I started as a county commissioner, served on the county school board, and now I'm at the State House. We did have one other CPA previously who is now a county commissioner. Again, he was term limited. And Barb, while I'm looking at it, I'll make a few quick, there's some questions relative to the 97 DeRolf decision. I believe there were actually 4 DeRolf decisions, and that's on school funding and the applicability of property taxes for that. What we did last General Assembly is something called the Fair School Funding Formula. It was a total redo. And you know, when the Speaker of the House has his name on the bill, it's probably going to happen. And it was the Cupp-Patterson bill. And what we did in the last General Assembly, I think we have allocated about $1.2 billion more to public schools. What the DeRolf decision basically said is that an over-reliance, and I'll stress that word, over-reliance on property taxes was unconstitutional. That's not a situation we have in Ohio now, because Ohio school funding through the state of Ohio has massively increased.
Okay. Let's see. Question about whether credit you're talking about in your legislation apply to nonprofit childcare facilities.
I believe it would. It doesn't have to be for profit. We've gone back and forth with the question there would be, is the credit refundable or non-refundable? And I'm working with Representative White on that. It's a good problem to have in Ohio, in that with the elimination of the CAT for 90% of the businesses, what do we do? Where would that credit apply? If there was a credit for a business and that business was not paying CAT, where would that credit apply? So I'm looking at trying to make that credit refundable.
Awesome. Well, we have time for one last question. Let me look and see if there's one that several people have been asking.
Okay.
Let's see. Personal property tax. So one question is, what are the chances it's going to go away? And if it does, what will make up that lost revenue? In your guess, in your estimation?
Well, when we say personal property tax, I mean, we eliminated in about 2006 the tangible personal property tax. So I need a little bit of clarification on that. We
Apologies. I just saw the clarification. Personal income tax.
Okay. There is a bill. Adam Matthews from Lebanon has introduced a bill to eliminate the personal income tax, and I believe CAT totally. The problem with that is, where's the money going to come from? If we increase sales tax, that's something that's viewed negatively by some, in that the idea is that, you know, sales tax can be regressive. The lower your income, the higher percentage you pay of sales tax. So I personally would not be willing to say that we should have a 3 or 4% increase in sales tax to eliminate the personal property tax. I'm sorry, to eliminate the personal income tax. You got me there, Bob.
I know.
What we have done, at one time, I believe, starting in 1971, we might have had 9 brackets. The highest rate was somewhere in the 8% range. Now we essentially have 2 brackets. There's a 0 bracket, you know, that I'm not counting, and they're up to $26,050. Based upon that, we have the lowest or the second lowest personal income tax rate in all of the Great Lakes. There's some states that don't have PIT, but they do funding different ways. Florida doesn't, but they get a huge amount from sales tax. Texas doesn't, but they get a huge amount in oil and gas and extraction. And I know that there's others, I believe either North or South Dakota don't have, but again, they've got, you know, the Bakken oil there that they're able to monetize.
Yeah.
So there's
Thank you.
Well, just let me say, in the State House, there is a consistent effort for all 6 years that I've been there to reduce the personal income tax. And now we're in round numbers at a 3% rate, and we've preserved the business income deduction, which is something else that the Ohio Society of CPAs have been very, very diligently working on. Yeah,
very important to small business owners. So, well, thank you so much for joining us. We have other questions. We'll work with you offline to see if there's any you want to share your wisdom on. And if with that, we are back to the full advance. So thank you so much for joining us. Really.
You're welcome. Thanks, Barb. You guys do a wonderful job.